In my lifetime, I've spent a lot of time out in the woods. I would rather be out in the woods than any place else in the world. It restores my soul. I feel close to God there amongst the green, beautiful trees and the ferns and everything out there. But there's something I wonder about now that I had never considered back in the day. That something was Bigfoot ever very close to me when I was out there? So see, you younger viewers, please keep in mind that it was not long ago, and there were no smartphones, the internet, or digital cameras. And back then, I didn't know much about Bigfoot, simply because I did not have access to the information at my fingertips as I do today. This past April 2020, when we were all supposed to be hunkered down in our homes, trembling in fear over the horrible COVID virus, I began to binge watch every movie or documentary I could find about old Big Hairy Sasquatch. And believe me, there was a lot out there. Some were pretty awesome and some of them were pretty amazing. But I never did lock myself away, though I just did what I always did, but I was a little more careful. In watching, though, I learned things that I had not known back in the day that would have probably caused me some concern at the time, being alone in the woods. But I don't know if it would or not. But anyways, now that I think about it, there are a couple of episodes I want to tell you about that did happen to me. See, watching the programs, I saw things that actually did happen to me when I was in the woods. The wood knocking, for instance, and rock throwing, and the eerie dead silence that will fall over things, and the disgusting smell that is sometimes associated with Bigfoot, called skunk ape down south in Florida particularly. That bad smell associated. But back in the mid-1980s, I moved with my mom and dad to Greenbush, Michigan, and it was a very nice place. I loved it. It was one of the best times of my life, but not the best. But it was on 10 acres surrounded by trees and swamps, and there were a few neighbors, but what ones there were, they were a good distance away. And that's how I liked it. But I cleared just enough room in the middle of those 10 acres for a really nice modular home to be brought in. And as well, I had 3 small outbuildings. And this was one was a museum, one was a workshop, and one was storage. Okay. But this was about 5 miles from Harrisville, where I had a place that I often frequented to dig for relics. Now, the actual site was down Swamp Road, and the place had a feel of isolation. It was surrounded by woods and swamps and a few farm fields, and there were also some abandoned gravel pits. But the old dump site produced an awesome array of relics from the mid-1800s right up through the 1940s. And point is, I spent a great deal of time there. I wish I had all the videos that I shot there. They were well, I won't get into where they went. But there was one morning in particular. It was in August 1988, and it was early, for me anyways, like around 7:30, 8 o'clock. And digging for relics, is, if you've ever done it, you know, can get mighty hot and sweaty. And I wanted to get an early start. So as I recall, the heat and humidity was already building up quite quickly. I was surrounded by the typical woodland sounds that I love so much. The constant drone of the swarms of mosquitoes. Yes, you can love that sound, if they're not biting you, that is. And every once in a while came the buzzing sound of the cicada, and the frogs singing out was almost deafening, but the frogs in the spring is one of my favorite sounds in the whole world. I just love it. And I recall hearing some branches breaking and thinking, excuse me, that some deer were moving about. Then there was a loud crack, and I mean, it was really loud. It startled me. It sounded like someone hitting a tree with a large piece of wood. It did not sound very far away, and as I said, it startled me, but it really only startled me for a moment, you know. And after a short bit, I resumed digging and pulling old stopper-type bottles out of varying sizes and color from the ground. My hopes, as usual, were very high that I would find something of real value, and sometimes I did. But I valued it all, even the broken stuff. But then it happened again, but sounding louder and closer this time. Now, Bigfoot never crossed my mind, but I have to admit to having visions of some, sorry, toothless, deranged inbred, like from the movie The Hills Have Eyes, lurking about with spittle running down his chin, whilst thinking how he would have me for dinner and not as a guest, if you get my drift. But the second time, sorry, there is nobody in Harrisville. Let me straighten that out. There is nobody in Harrisville that looks like that. None. None. Okay, anyway, the second time seemed to cause everything, though, to go deadly silent. There was no sound at all, and it was as if everything, including the mosquitoes, had just gone into hiding or moved to another location almost instantly. And I must admit the silence was rather disconcerting. It was unnatural for all the sounds of the woods and swamps to just be gone like that in an instant. And I tried to rationalize it as someone else being in the woods scurrying around, but that did little to ease my discomfort right then. I became overwhelmed by the feeling of being watched. You know, that cracks me up a little bit, because I watch some of the paranormal investigator shows, and they're in these old dark houses that are out in the woods or in a cemetery, and they're like, "Ooh, I feel like I'm being watched." Go to one of those places, and you're going to feel like you're being watched. It's your nerves. That just popped into my mind as I was telling you that, but I felt like I was being watched, and perhaps that was just my nerves. But I did a quick visual scan of the area and saw nothing, so I continued digging. And maybe 5-10 minutes later, it happened yet again. A loud crack, and this time the sound was very loud and very close. I felt an urgency to leave the woods very quickly. So I gathered up my few finds, I grabbed my shovel, and I made my way swiftly to my little Mercury Comet car. And I left as quickly as I could. And I really don't know why I was so afraid. The thought of Bigfoot never entered my mind, but then why would it? I knew of its existence, but I knew little about it. And I really did not let it bother me for a long time, and not many days later, I was back out there digging. And I know there's lots more to be found, and there's still an unending amount of material out there to be found, if you feel like going out there and digging. I don't know if it's private property now or what, but it was private property then, but nobody cared. Anyways, there was a similar, though more disturbing episode at Neg-we-gon State Park, just north of Harrisville at Black River. At the time, I had an idea, I had an awesome red quad runner ATV, and man, I loved going off into the deep woods on that thing alone. I had some of the best times on that thing. I often loaded it on the back of the pickup truck I had at that time, and headed off to wherever I ended up. And one day in question, on the day in question, that's exactly what I did. And Neg-we-gon is where I ended up. And Neg-we-gon is what is called a primitive state park. It is mostly woods, sometimes swamps, and hugs the Lake Huron shoreline. A really great place for a guy to go and lose himself and be alone for a while. Get away from it all. Especially if you have a nagging witch of a wife. I'm sorry. There I go. I wasn't going to say anything about her. But anyways, I apologize. Not to her, though. When I arrived at the parking lot, I was happy to see that there were no other vehicles there. It meant I was likely going to be alone out there, and that I'd be the only one around literally for miles. So I unloaded the quad runner, stowed my gear on it for the day's adventures, and I headed north on the rugged trail. And believe me, some spots were pretty rugged. I traveled about 5 miles north, where the trail leads into a large clearing, which itself seems somewhat out of place to me. I mean, it's surrounded by woods, and there was no obvious reason for the clearing to be there, just in the middle of woods, just as it is. At the end of the clearing, the trail turns to the northwest and winds past a very old and unattended apple orchard. That is where I stopped. It was not my intent to do any digging for artifacts, but I brought my camera outfit, as I enjoyed nature photography very, very much, and still do. And I enjoyed it as much as treasure hunting. And believe me, there are some amazing things out there to photograph. There is a very old primitive stone fence, as well as a number of equally as old stone-lined pits. I do have a video on here about those, and I will try my best to remember to put it in the description, okay? But I remember standing there and breathing in that fresh lake air, and I felt very isolated, and that felt so damn good. I wish I could do that now. I wish I could do that today. But the day was quite warm, but very low humidity. And I had camped out at this site a number of times and never experienced anything unusual. What was about to happen, though, was very similar to the events on Swamp Road. This was the mid-1980s, and so there were no cell phones or digital cameras, as I spoke of earlier. And my 35mm camera was a sweet setup, and I had adapted it to take 3D paired stereo images. Without 3D, the stone fences looked like just stones on the ground, piles of rock, but they really stand out in 3D. You can see what they really are. When I'm photographing, while I was photographing, I became very focused to the exclusion of what was going on around me that day. And that happens quite often when I go out to do that. And as the shutter clicked away, my mind was busy trying to figure out who had made these ancient structures and why. I never really believed that there were Native American Indian, or that they were of Native American Indian origin, because they're unlike anything else really found in Michigan. Yeah. Some people believe that they were made by old world cultures that visited Michigan when copper was being mined up in the UP. And I tend to favor that train of thought, though there is no evidence to suggest it. While doing the photographs, a very loud, heavy crack, like large branches being slammed against a tree again, startled me. And I turned quickly in the direction that the sound originated. There was nothing unusual to be seen, and as in the incident on Swamp Road, it crossed my mind that someone else might be out there messing around a little bit, and after all, it was a beautiful day. And after a few moments, I began lining up more shots to take. And I would say less than 10 minutes later again, I heard something hit the ground near me with a muffled thud. And the ground was covered with a soft layer of green moss and dead leaves. There was a rock laying there close by, and it was about the size of my fist. Not real big, but the rock looked out of place, and I wondered that if that's what I heard hit the ground, because it didn't have any moss or anything growing on it, so it had been there not a long time. I began getting an uneasy feeling, a feeling that I was being watched again. But then there was silence again, just like out on Swamp Road. And the only sounds I could hear were the waves lapping against the Lake Huron shoreline and the distant booming, thunder-like sound that always mysteriously emanates from Thunder Bay up at Alpena. Very unusual, interesting to hear if you ever get a chance. But I finished photographing the stone-lined pits and moved on to the so-called stone fences. And they are curiously shaped structures ranging from 3 to 4 feet at the tallest. The fence ran off at various curves and angles, and each one once in a while there was a gap in the fence where it is supposed there might have been a gate at one time. So once again there came the loud sound of wood hitting wood, very hard and very loud, and they still sounded quite close. There was something else, though, that horrible rotten smell that I spoke of in the beginning, in the air that was not there at all when I arrived. It didn't smell like something dead, it smelled like something worse. That I would have noticed it if it was there when I first arrived. And the only thing I can compare the odor to, well, actually, was a dead and rotting skunk that was on the side of the road there on Cedar Lake Road where I lived in Greenbush. And you have never smelled anything in your life as bad as a rotting skunk. It is horrendous. And I actually went to move it, and the smell was overpowering, and it was a chore, really, to keep from vomiting. But I really wanted to stay, and decided to load my gear back onto the quad runner and head back to the parking lot. Now, I must admit, for the very first time, I was happy to believe in Neg-we-gon, just because of, I felt uncomfortable with that was going on. Nowadays, I live in Saginaw, Michigan, a good distance from my old stomping grounds up by Oscoda. It's a fascinating place to be, no doubt. Both historically and ancient history and prehistory here is incredible. And I'm not around much woodland here, but on an old farm field about a mile and a half from which is where my apartment is, which is where I am right now, I find many, many, many Native American Indian artifacts in a wide variety of types and time periods, from late Archaic right up through late Woodland and early Contact period. And it was on the field last year that I found a large stone effigy head that looks like a Sasquatch head. It even has that large crest and the big brow that they have. But in all, I found 10 different effigy figures there. This one, though, is quite outstanding, and the rock is bulbous and angular. I'm going to put a picture up of it after I'm done talking, okay? But as you'll be able to see, the Sasquatchian features I'm about to point out were created by using the arc pecking method of shaping stone, and that's where a small pointed or rounded stone was held in one hand, and it pecked down the layer, taking minute pieces, or at the other rock, taking off minute pieces, and thus shaping the rock into the intended form. So the stone that I'm going to show you is the actual effigy head. And again, if you think it's going to be like a regular sculpture or something, it's not. But they did things in a very the word's on the tip of my tongue, I can't think of it, but well, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, those are the experiences. I'd like to know what you think. Please leave some comments in the comment section. Please leave me a thumbs up if you feel so inclined. It helps my channel, and it makes me feel really, really, really good when people leave me thumbs up. But it makes me feel very good when you leave comments too, good or bad. I'd like to hear from you. So I'm going to put the still pictures up. Thank you for stopping by. God bless you. Stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. And I love all of you.